Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, and welcome to this COP26 side event on ensuring biodiversity benefits of nature-based solutions, organized by the Ocean and Climate Platform together with the Zoological Society of London and Comité 21. Thank you for joining us. So my name is Marine Lesser, and I am International Policy Officer at the Ocean and Climate Platform, and I shall be your moderator today. Before we start, maybe a quick brief on logistics. So we would like this session to be as interactive as possible. So I would like to encourage everyone who's watching us on the COP26 platform to ask their question in the chat box. I will now pass it on to Raphaël Cuvelier, the Vice President of the Ocean and Climate Platform, for some welcoming remarks. The floor is yours, Raphaël.
Thank you, Marine. First of all, I would like to welcome all speakers and viewers online. It's a little bit difficult to speak online, but that's it, and we are going to work in that way. Thanks for partners for co-organizing this side event, the Zoological Society of London and the Comité 21. Thank you very much for your help and for your collaboration for this meeting. I would like also to thank the UNFCCC Secretariat for hosting this event and logistic team for their support. Briefly, some words to introduce this event. As you may recall, the IPCC have produced recently two special reports, one on ocean and the other on soils. And these two reports have highlighted the importance of ecosystem in climate regulation, in climate mitigation, and in climate adaptation. So today, this workshop, this event, is focused on nature-based solutions because right now you have to speak about solutions. And this event will convene marine, terrestrial, and urban experts from multiple sectors to explore how nature-based solutions can effectively deliver an integrated approach to tackle not only climate change, but also biodiversity loss, the two very interconnecting greatest challenges over time. So right now I would like to introduce Stéphane Paillet, the Director for the Environment and Climate for the French Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs. Stéphane, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation of the Ocean and Climate Platform. Thank you to the Zoological Society of London and the Comité 21 for giving me the floor and giving the floor to my country. So, mesdames et messieurs, last June, IPCC and NbS published a joint workshop report that demonstrates the urgent need to jointly address the climate change crisis and the biodiversity loss crisis in order to resolve them. And indeed, any change in the climate system has an impact on natural ecosystems and biodiversity. At the same time, biodiversity and ecosystems contribute to the regulation of carbon dioxide and water vapor in the atmosphere, and therefore of temperature and precipitation. Therefore, the responses to the climate and biodiversity crisis are intimately intertwined. Nature-based solutions can help fighting climate impacts and preserve biodiversity at the same time, building very concretely a virtuous circle between what we do for climate and what we do for biodiversity. However, using nature to fight climate change should not make us forget that this nature is already undergoing the impacts of climate change, which aggravates the effects of anthropogenic pressures. We must, therefore, protect and restore biodiversity while continuing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. France is committed to highlighting the benefits of nature-based solutions as a source of CO2 reduction and as a tool for adaptation, using nature to increase territorial resilience. In terms of adaptation, we already have to deal with extreme conditions, such as drought, flooding, and coastal erosion, among others. And we must also anticipate future climate impacts. Nature-based solutions allow for increased territorial resilience and no-regrets actions that provide both environmental and social co-benefits. At the international level, the French Développement Agency AFD, is committed to increasing the share of bilateral climate finance with co-benefits for biodiversity from 15 to 30%. We also promote and participate actively to an ambitious international agenda on climate change and biodiversity. By hosting the last World Organization, the World Conservation Congress in Marseille last September, France tried to enhance the mobilization and the implementation of nature-based solutions for ambitious actions on adaptation to climate change as well as biodiversity protection. The IUCN published a useful standard for the definition of and financing of these nature-based solutions. Moreover, alongside Costa Rica, France co-chairs the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and Peoples, which aims to reach an ambitious agreement on biodiversity conservation at the 15th Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Especially, its objective is to support the adoption of a target aiming to protect 30% of the planet's land and 30% of its oceans by 2030. Last point, on September 3rd, 2021, at the IUCN World Congress, the President Macron, the President of the French Republic, committed to hold a One Ocean Summit, aiming to first bring all the stakeholders around the table to build concrete initiatives, and second element, build an international legal agenda to support the projects of considering the ocean as a global public good. This summit will be prepared in cooperation with the United Nations and the World Bank, as well as with many public, private, and civil society partners. It will be organized in Brest, in the western part of France, in early 2022, and it will fit in the sequence of major international events we'll have on the oceans in 2022. Thank you very much for invitation, and thank you very much for listening to me.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Paillet, pour vos commentaires. Thank you so much for your work. And now, without any further ado, let's dive into the core of this session. Nature-based solution is a term that we often hear, that we have been hearing a lot recently, and that can be quite controversial. So I believe it would be great to go back to the definition and to understand what's at stake here. So to shed light on this important concept, Dr. Nathalie Petorelli, I would like to turn to you first. Nathalie, you're a senior scientist at the Zoological Society of London, and your work is centered around climate change and its impact on biodiversity, and it considers opportunities to jointly tackle the climate and biodiversity crises, including through nature-based solutions. So now, for those who are not really familiar with NbS, can you explain what it is and how nature-based solutions contribute to advancing climate and biodiversity objectives?
Thank you very much, Marine. So I've put together a little presentation, which please would be nice. Thank you very much. So this presentation is based on a report that the Zoological Society of London published last month called Time to Integrate a Global Climate Change and Biodiversity Science Policy Agenda. So as previously mentioned, we are dealing with two highly intertwined crises. The climate change one and the biodiversity one. And they are literally two faces of the same coin. Climate change is impacting wildlife by, for example, threatening the long-term survival of many species, but also by altering their distribution in response to climate change, impacting, therefore, ecosystem functioning and stability. At the same time, this loss of biodiversity is deepening the climate change crisis, not only altering Earth's capacity to sequester and store the carbon that we emit, but also removing opportunity for our societies to adapt to the new climate normal. So nature, not just trees, is central to tackling climate change. In this space, what do we have? We have nature-based solutions. So what are nature-based solutions? It's basically involving working with nature to address societal challenges such as climate change, while at the same time providing biodiversity benefits and benefits for people. What are the benefits that are expected when deploying nature-based solutions? This has all to do with increasing carbon sequestration capacity and or increasing storage. It has to do with providing biodiversity benefits, and it also has to do, as I was previously saying, to impact people and help them adapt to climate change. Examples of a nature-based solution include, for example, protecting ecosystems such as tropical forests, seagrasses and mangroves, but also restoring habitats and ecosystems through projects such as restoration, but also rewilding project, or even a urban greening project. Now, together with radical measures to decarbonize energy system, nature-based solution could be a game changer to jointly address the climate change and biodiversity crisis. A recent study suggested that the restoration of the planet's most degraded areas, in combination with the protection of biodiversity hotspots, could significantly boost carbon sequestration capacity while preventing around 70% of predicted species extinction. There are, however, uncertainties and difficulties associated with the implementation of nature-based solutions. And those evidence gaps link, for example, with biodiversity benefits. We know very little about the actual benefit that nature-based solution may deliver. We know very little about the impact of climate change on ecosystem distribution and on the likelihood that some ecosystem may just collapse, which means that this affects our ability to predict where to best deploy those nature-based solutions. Then there's the whole problem of effectiveness, which basically is in changing climatic conditions. Can you be sure that the effectiveness that you have now in terms of your nature-based solution will last in the long term? And then there's the problem of scale, something that has been quite topical at COP26, which is we are quite good now at developing solutions at small scale. But when it comes to scale up, and we're going to have to scale up to really address the climate crisis, we are not as good. And there's some real knowledge gap when it comes to knowing what to do to deploy at the scale that is needed. And finally, there is the problem of risk, something that has been talked by many people before within the nature-based solution space, which is that there are risks, societal risk, human rights risk, ecological risk that comes with the implementation of nature-based solution. And those risks, for the moment, are reported on an ad hoc basis, but there's no real comprehensive framework to really understand what risk you're taking and therefore enabling people to make decisions about the type of nature-based solution that they are prepared to come along with. So the main message here is that deployed in the wrong place and in the wrong way, there's a real risk for nature-based solution to become a greenwashing exercise and a menace to biodiversity, local community, and human rights. Now, importantly, this is something that the scientific community and the practitioner community is aware of. And there are some standards and safeguards that are coming and are starting to appear. And as previously mentioned, the IUCN is doing some great work there, but IUCN as well as other organizations. There are some red lines that people probably, there's quite some consensus on those red lines. The first one is that nature-based solution is not and cannot be a substitute for the rapid phasing out of fossil fuels. They also need to really involve all types of ecosystems. This is not just about protecting natural, pristine ecosystem. This is also about working with semi-natural ecosystem, working lands, working seascape, as well as enabling, in some spaces, novel ecosystems to emerge in and around cities or across the wider landscape. Importantly, they need to be designed, implemented, managed, and monitored by or in partnership with indigenous people and local communities. You cannot impose those solutions to people. It doesn't work. And finally, they need to be explicitly designed and adaptively managed to provide measurable benefit for biodiversity, something that is quite difficult to assess, but really key to get that win-win system. Now, because nature-based solutions are tackling two crises at once, there's a broader need for systemic change. the climate change crisis and the biodiversity crisis are currently dealt by two conventions and associated scientific panels that have vastly different political weight and visibility as well as funding. We will need clarity on who is going to advance the environmental agenda that equally supports biodiversity conservation and climate change mitigation and adaptation. It has been said before, but we need major funding mechanism. And we need one that unequivocally enables countries to choose to invest in projects that equally support, again, biodiversity conservation and climate change mitigation. And then finally, we need action on harmful financial incentive. It doesn't make sense to continue to give money to protect nature and then give even more money to destroy it. We need investment in biodiversity, and we also need change in environmental legislation. Our laws are not currently set up for what's coming. We do need laws that enable conservation in time of rapid environmental change. So what's my conclusion here? Yes, there are risks and challenges associated with nature-based solutions, but we cannot ignore the biodiversity crisis and the potential of nature-based solutions. As scientists and as conservationists, it is our responsibility to help enable a just transition to a decarbonized, nature-positive, sustainable world. We stand ready to block the knowledge gaps preventing progress, develop the safeguards and guidelines needed to make sure that nature-based solutions do not become another greenwashing exercise, to train people and support people so that they get the expertise and support that they need, and to work with everyone else to build the future that our children and all the next generation after that deserve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nathalie, for setting the scene and for these truly inspirational words. Well, the need to address together climate change and biodiversity loss has entered, as you mentioned, the scientific and political mainstream, including through the lens of maximizing synergies and through the deployment of nature-based solutions. This actually has been well illustrated, as you mentioned, by the joint workshop organized by the IPCC and NbS earlier today. I'm giving you the remote. But what I've really understood from your presentation, Nathalie, is that now is the time to go further and to define what synergies must look like and at what levels which actors need to be involved in defining an integrated ambition and integrated action. Let me now turn to you, Dr. Jennifer Lenhart. You're a global lead for the WWF Cities program, and you work towards addressing urban environmental challenges via integrated approaches. So could you please tell us more about your work on the ground and how urban nature-based solutions can concretely advance climate and biodiversity goals? Can you share concrete examples of how they provide concrete benefits for people and for nature, basically?
Absolutely. And let me just echo what a fantastic presentation, Nathalie, and really setting the scene for how we go forward and from the big picture of why this is important and some of the controversies that is there to looking closer to cities. So if I could have my slides, please. Excellent. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So just maybe a first question is, why would an organization like WWF be so concerned about cities? Well, first of all, we do see that within a report that we publish every 2 years, the Living Planet Index, we have seen a significant drop in the population size of mammals, birds, fish, amphibians, and reptiles by 68% since 1970. And what does this have to do with cities? Well, cities are home to 55% of population, 70% of carbon emissions, and 75% of natural resource use. So there is an inherent link between what we are seeing in the natural world and what we are doing in our cities. Simultaneously, we know that it's not just about cities, and certainly while we're here at the Climate Change Conference, it's also really about what nations decide and negotiate together. So one of the things that we have been proud to stand behind at WWF is something called the Leaders' Pledge for Nature. And this is really where we get and we work with countries to unite to reverse biodiversity loss by 2030 for sustainable development. And I'm proud to say that we've had so far 92 countries and the European Union commit to this pledge. And we hope to really accelerate it up and see the linkages between climate change and biodiversity loss. Just why cities? Well, cities have historically been always close to nature. And why is this? Because when humans settled down, when we stopped migrating and we started agriculture, we stopped in the places that had the most fertile soils, that had the best access to fresh water and salt water for fishing and for farming and for building our habitats. So there is a very strong integration between cities and nature, and we need to realize this again. And by 2030, 40% of protected areas will be within 50 kilometers of cities. So we see that there's a real need to connect nature in cities and around cities, including what we'd like to call socio-ecological corridors to protect the natural areas around our city and reduce urban sprawl, but also to see connectivity improving in our cities. So if this works out correctly, oh, it doesn't actually. Well, let me just tell you that normally this image, if I click on it, it actually sprawls open and the walls become green and there's trees on the street, and I think maybe this is a PDF, so it doesn't work right now, but it is a GIF, so I will definitely share it with you afterwards. But just to envision that instead of having concrete jungles, these same spaces can be very concrete, beautiful green areas. And interesting to note that in many of our cities, between 40 and 60% of public space is dedicated to cars in the form of roads, traffic, parking lots. These are not places for people. These are not places for nature. These are places for machines. And we need to rethink that, and especially in our urban core. So on to the next slide here. So I just wanted to zoom in here a bit and share with you a new publication that was actually launched at the IUCN World Conservation Congress in Marseille in September, and a few case studies that we have found in particularly motivating examples of urban nature-based solutions, and more importantly, perhaps, all of the co-benefits that come from investing in nature in our cities. And at the same time today, we took this moment as a good incentive to launch our new policy paper on the connections between climate and nature. So I'd like to just highlight, why is it relevant to invest in nature in an urban point of view? And well, first of all, to improve urban resilience, nature integration improves health and livability, as well as well-being. Investing in nature reduces extreme heat impacts. It helps filter our air, especially when 90% of cities and urban dwellers breathe polluted air. Nature can help to mitigate this. We see that investing in nature can help recharge our water resources and provides multiple job opportunities, from low-skilled wages up to high-skilled technical capacity in terms of planning professions, etc. We've also seen that investing in nature can help cool cities, and I'm very happy to say that yesterday, the Cool Coalition, which is led by UNEP and has many organizations, including WWF, launched a new report called Beating the Heat, a sustainable cooling guide for cities. So that's out. If you're interested in that, check it out. It's online now and available for those who are interested. And of course, investing in nature can help counter that urban sprawl that we already mentioned earlier and save municipal resources. It's not that we have to invest in gray infrastructure versus green infrastructure, but investing in green infrastructure can be cheaper in the long run while providing so many co-benefits in terms of ecosystem services, even local tourism. So that's just kind of the overarching, and I just wanted to share that since we're very happy to have this new policy paper out, and we can definitely provide it for you afterwards. But what are some of those cities? Well, there are many, and that's what's fantastic. But just to show you 3 cities from 3 different parts in the world. Firstly, Malmö in Sweden, a city I proudly used to work at, so it's fun for me to share this example. But Malmö had this neighborhood called Augustenborg. And this was a rundown part of the city. It needed a retrofit. It suffered from many problems, including urban flooding, abandonment, crime, and a loss of job opportunities. So the city, probably about 25 years ago now, time flies, decided that, you know, we need to reinvest in this neighborhood, and we need to rebrand it as the Eco City Augustenborg. And how did they do this? By preserving the integrity of the local ecosystem and restoring degraded ecosystems. This was done by investing in green roofs and open stormwater management, because this area had a huge problem with flooding. And now I can actually tell you today, it is one of the only neighborhoods in Malmö that when we have these huge rain events, these cloudbursts, there's no flooding in this neighborhood. This used to be the neighborhood that had the biggest amount of flooding, but now because of learning from nature and incorporating nature, we actually see that we are more resilient to climate change in this neighborhood. But at the same time, what we've seen is doing this investment in open stormwater management and in green roofs, we've seen a 50% increase in biodiversity. We've seen a 20% reduction in carbon emissions, and 30% less people unemployed. So there's a lot of benefits in addition to just, you know, nature. So there are a lot of different things here. Also, what's really important to engage the community from the start. Just going to jump through the next examples pretty quick. But another one, now we're going from Sweden over to Colombia in South America. The city of Medellin has invested in a fantastic green corridors project, and they did this in order to really preserve the integrity and ecosystem status, as well as connecting and restoring the green and blue belts of the city. Again, bringing the community in from the start, a greener Medellin for you. So really getting the citizens involved. Doing so, reducing the average temperature, and hiring local people. So this is really about, you know, seeing that there is a local benefit to the community. And finally, the city of Seoul in South Korea. I'm sure many of us have heard of this example, but it's a fantastic one about daylighting a creek that used to be a concrete jungle and just, you know, tearing up the road and reconnecting the city to its river. It has become an extremely popular place for visitors and locals alike to connect with nature again. And in doing so, seeing a 3 to 5 degree reduction in temperature and over 400 hectares of parks created, and as well as a reduction in particulate matter. So when we're talking about climate change, it's also about linking it to the impacts of air pollution. So again, they're similar to the other cases, also, you know, creating this connection between citizens and researchers and the local government. I think that's where I'm going to stop. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for bringing this urban perspective to the table and for also sharing these great examples. Actually, as an ocean advocate myself, I'm pretty happy to see that there's a green-blue neighborhood in Malmö, this coastal city in Sweden. And yeah, ecosystem-based adaptation of coastal cities is obviously an issue that we hold very dear to our hearts at the Ocean and Climate Platform, especially for my colleague Théophile Bongart. Théophile, you're leading the Cities project, coordinating the platform work on coastal adaptation. Can you please tell us more about this fascinating initiative, but might be a bit biased here, and how nature-based solutions have the potential to protect coastal communities from sea level rise?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Marine. My name is Théophile Bongart. I work for the Ocean and Climate Platform, and I manage a project called Cities, focusing on the adaptation of coastal cities to sea level rise. And it is, of course, for us crucial to understand the role that nature-based solutions can play in protecting cities from extreme events and from erosion and sea level rise, and also to understand how we can implement those solutions when we are a mayor or policymakers in those coastal cities. So very briefly, some figures. Because of climate change, the sea level is rising. It could rise as much as 1 meter before the end of the century, and extreme events are becoming more and more frequent in coastal cities. And on the other side, we have a population, a urban population increasing, growing very fastly, and especially in coastal cities that gather around 2/3 of the urban population already. And without any adaptation, the IPCC tells us that damages will cost around 10% of the GDP by the end of the century. So it's of course for us in this context very important to work for the Ocean and Climate Platform on this topic. And we decided to really value the solutions. And of course, it is not a problem that the cities have already tackled head-on. And we need more examples for policymakers and for mayors of great success and tangible example of nature-based solutions in coastal cities. So the cities project, therefore, aims to first identify what are the solutions that can be implemented by promoting real-world experiences. It aims to analyze these solutions and their sustainability based on multidisciplinary scientific expertise. And then, finally, it aims to promote the best governance practices to submit policy recommendations. And in our collaboration with scientists and with the CNRS, we worked with different researchers from various disciplines like geographers, geomorphologists, economists, anthropologists, and also ecologists like Joachim Claudet, who will participate to the next roundtable, to really understand what are the solutions and the strategies that we can develop to adapt coastal cities to sea level rise. And we propose a typology of different solutions, considering hard protection, soft protection, managed retreat of population and infrastructures, but also considering nature-based solutions. And what I can tell you very briefly is that substantial scientific works have been done on the efficiency of the mangroves, of salt marshes, of oyster beds, of coral reefs, and they show how and under which conditions they can attenuate wave power, they can attenuate the erosion, and they can protect and enhance coastal protection. And the results is that we can say that nature-based solutions are a concrete solutions to protect coastal cities. So that's the first very positive point. The second one is that the IPCC shows that because of climate change, because of sea level rise, it may lead to significant coastal ecosystem loss. So by the end of the century, climate change is a threat for the effectiveness of nature-based solutions. And finally, of course, in coastal cities, human intervention played a dominant role in altering ecosystem functioning. And for example, the dune mobility and coastal nature-based solution, coastal cities are not always the more welcoming places for nature-based solutions. But what we really want to emphasize in this paper, and you can read this paper thanks to this very short link on the slide, is that there is no single solution, and nature-based solutions have to be considered in a hybrid approach of coastal solutions for cities. And it is about combining natural and build infrastructures to protect the coastline. And what we see is that having this hybrid approach is more cost effective than just building dikes or building seawalls. So we really emphasize that nature-based solutions are part of this new model, hybriding, combining, mixing different solutions. Concretely, we also identified a lot of different initiatives that have been implemented on the ground concretely, and we identify more than 70 solutions implemented. And what we see is that all the solutions are combined, and nature-based solutions is part of half of all the different solutions and initiatives we have identified. So it's very positive, and we can see that nature-based solutions are already considered as a concrete responses to sea level rise. Very briefly, here are just two examples that you can find on this solution map, and you can see that all the solutions, you can see the different risk solutions are developed to tackle. You can see what are the different solutions that are mixed. It is nature-based solution plus managed retreat plus planning documents plus hard solutions or what we call soft solution. And you can also have access to who are the different actors involved in the implementation, in the elaboration of those policy and solutions. And it is very important, and on those two examples, you can see that in the US, for example, different cities worked all together with the county, with the civil society, and for example here with Surfrider, to be able to define a sustainable solutions that will mix here nature-based solutions plus managed retreat. The second example is in the south of France, and this is the same idea. The city worked with the region, with the department, and also with a university, and together they could manage retreats and they could develop nature-based solution and preserve a very specific biodiversity in this area. So briefly to conclude, we can see, thanks to this scientific paper and thanks to all those solutions that we have identified on the map, that nature-based solutions are a concrete solution, but it's still sometimes difficult to implement it. And it is necessary to consider the design of a new coastal model at a bigger scale than just the scale of the city. It is considering the city and also the surrounding territories. And working at this scale, we can more easily find a place to develop nature-based solution. And we have great examples, so like in Malmö, and bringing and preserving the biodiversity in the city area. The second point is that nature-based solutions should also be articulated in different time scale. And it is very interesting to see that we can develop nature-based solution in order to remove a seawall or to remove a dikes in the future once the ecosystem is functioning and once the ecosystem can play his role and protect a coastal city or a neighborhood from erosion or extreme events and submersion. That's it. That's some conclusion we can share, and it's a big challenge for a nature-based solution for coastal city. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Théophile, for your insights. It's great to actually see how nature-based solutions can be explicitly designed and adaptively managed to provide measurable benefits for local communities. Natalie was actually talking about the difficulties of scaling up nature-based solutions, and I think hybridizing nature-based solutions with hard solutions over time and space, as you were mentioning, is a good example of the flexibility that we need to match people's requirements and needs on the ground. So thank you, Natalie, Jennifer, and Theo for your great presentation. Before moving on to the next event, we will take a 2-minute break for COVID restrictions. Thank you very much, everyone.
Anyone else can take a seat? I don't know if there's any particular order that you want. Yes, I'd like you to get mic'd up first. So thank you very much. No, it doesn't matter. Do you have any particular order that you want? No, we don't. As quick as you can, please. Raphael, they're all mic'd apart from Sylvie. Everyone is mic'd apart from Sylvie. She's making the closing remarks. Okay.
I'm perfect. I just want to remind everyone that the event finishes at 4:15, so we're going to be a bit short on time, so please try to stay outside.
Yes, this is the countdown clock.
It was supposed to be approximately 2 minutes per response. Yeah, but you will have there's the time on the screen in front of you, so you can get an idea. We just need 5 minutes for closing for Sylvie to make the closing remarks. Yeah, exactly, for the closing. It finishes at 4:15.
Give us 10 seconds and then we'll come back in. Hold on.
And there is no flight. So it's going to be Joachim first, then it's going to be Richard, then it's going to be Bettina, then it's going to be you, Daniel. Yep.
Okay, so I'll count you down
Then
again.
it's going to move a bit in the second one because there's 2 questions that are changing the order afterwards.
Great. Okay, so everyone get yourself settled. I'll count you down from 5 to 0. When we get to 0, thank you. Once we get to 0, you'll be live again. So, everyone happy?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, so counting down from 5, 4, 3.
Thank you everyone for waiting and staying tuned. Moving on to the next part of this event, we now welcome our 4 new speakers whom have just joined us. Hi everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm so pleased to see experts from such different backgrounds gathered here today to discuss opportunities to implement and scale up nature-based solutions across sectors. So if that's okay with you all, I will follow up with coastal and marine environments. So welcome to you, Joachim Claudet. You are senior researcher at the National Center for Scientific Research, le CNRS pour les francophones, and as well as president of the Plateforme's Scientific Committee. So your work focuses on the evaluation of marine protected areas. So from your perspective, what are the benefits of nature-based solutions for coastal and marine environments, and how can we best optimize these benefits, especially since you're a scientist? How can science contribute to boosting these benefits? Thank you.
Thank you, Marine. Thank you for the invitation. I know we're short in time, so we'll try to be very quick. Something important is that we have a wide range of possible nature-based solutions of different types, and we can rank them from minimal or no human intervention to very strong human intervention. But the important thing is that they by essence, because they are NbS, nature-based solution, they convey multiple benefits, and so they are based on either the protection or conservation or restoration of biodiversity, which is endemic to the area, otherwise it is not an NbS. And so on top of those biodiversity benefits, they can provide a range of climate benefits and adaptation benefits. And this is very important, and depending on the range and the extent of human intervention, they can be designed to satisfy a wide range of ecosystem services, but without any optimization, such as MPAs, for example, marine protected areas. They have a wide range of benefits for a lot of different actors, but you cannot maximize those. Or you can have nature-based solutions which are, for example, based only for decreasing the power of waves for coastal adaptation. And here you will try to maximize the delivery of one ecosystem service.
Okay, thank you very much, Joachim. It's great to see how through science we can guide action, and how science can inform all the decision making and all finally the policy making behind it. So let me move to our next panelist, Richard Benwell. You're the Chief Executive of the Wildlife and Countryside Link, which is the UK's largest coalition of conservation charities. And you have a considerable expertise in environment policy and advocacy. What do you think, from your perspective, what are the benefits of nature-based solutions, and how, for example, policymakers can fully grasp these benefits?
I think if policymakers want to grasp the importance of net zero, they've got to grasp the importance of nature-based solutions. We haven't quite said it clearly enough yet today that there is simply no way to do net zero without doing nature-based solutions. The path to 1.5 degrees is a green path. You can't keep 1.5 alive unless you keep nature alive. And that's the message that we need to get loud and clear to everybody who's interested in climate and nature. And as we sit here at COP26 with the world's attention on climate change, we're thinking ahead at the same time to COP15, the biodiversity COP. And we know that COP15 will never garner the same attention that COP26 has. So the message from me today really is, if you're interested in climate change, don't let the energy end today. All those thousands of people who are interested in COP26, refocus that attention on COP15 after this COP, because there is no way that nature-based solutions will work for biodiversity unless we get similarly strong targets to halt the decline of nature that we have for halting climate change. And that means having targets in national legislation to halt the decline of the abundance of species that are equally rigorous to emissions reductions obligations. Only then will nature-based solutions work in the way that they're meant to, which is to ensure that not only are they about the number of tons of carbon that you sequester, but they're also about the way that they'll affect that trajectory of species decline that we've got to turn around. Just to finally emphasize the point, we know that to get to net zero, in the UK, probably we're going to need about 75 megatons of carbon removals to hit net zero. That's really hard. That's a lot of nature. And at the moment, we're a net emitter from our land use emissions. So we're not just talking about sequestering, we actually have to stop emitting from those marine ecosystems, the farmed environment, from cityscapes. And it's even more true on the global scale. We're talking 80 gigatons of carbon removals from nature that we're going to need by 2050. So that's the message today. If you care about COP26, don't forget COP15. Let's keep the energy going, and let's make sure that the trajectory for carbon emissions reduction is matched by equally strong international and domestic targets for halting the decline of nature.
Thank you very much, Richard. I've very much appreciated what you said on the targets. I think it's really important to have very precise and specific concrete targets and indicators to keep the action and keep the flow of the energy. Actually talking about mobilizing energy and action, Bettina Laville, you're the president and co-founder of Comité 21, which is the first multi-actor network for sustainable development in France. And you also previously worked as an environmental advisor to François Mitterrand, former president of France for non-French natives, and you contributed to the preparation of the Rio conferences. That's why I mentioned it. I believe it's safe to say that you have the extensive experience in mobilizing relevant stakeholders for climate and also for environmental action. So from your perspective, what do you consider to be the main benefits of nature-based solutions, and how can we use nature-based solutions as a lever to mobilize all stakeholders, including the private sector?
Yes, thank you very much. I am survival. It's a very important question. After the common report by IPCC and IPBES, the government thinks that it is necessary to get closer biodiversity and climate issues. It's true that the interaction are more and more important, and finally biodiversity is recognized to be as important as climate is a good issue. The French president at the One Planet, not Mitterrand, no, Macron, at the One Planet Summit at the USN Congress defended this position. From my view, this position makes sense under three conditions, important conditions. Experts have to keep their specificities because climate change is a global science, and biodiversity is global science and local science. Is very, very important for me. Financing have to be identified, and it should not be a reason to reduce them. Yes. And the legal arrangement has to keep the best of the two conventions. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, Bettina, for all this information on the two different conventions, the two Rio conventions, and how we can best try to scale up finance for NbS in that regard. Actually, talking about finance, nature-based solutions can also be used as a powerful level to mention and increase climate and biodiversity finance, as you mentioned, Bettina. Daniel Zarin, you know a lot about the connection between nature and the global economy. You are Executive Director for Forest and Climate Change at WCS, the Wildlife Conservation Society, where you work towards protecting intact forests, preventing the expansion of deforestation, and reforesting in and around priority landscapes. So, Daniel, from a forest perspective, what can you tell us about the main benefits of nature-based solutions, and how can the global economy and finance contribute to nature-based solutions and vice versa?
Well, it's a great question. I think maybe my role in this panel might be to try to keep things a bit simple here. So if we're really focused on successfully mitigating the climate emergency in this decade ahead, which is really what we've got to do it in, we need to really rapidly do two things. First, and I think this is pretty well recognized, is we need to reduce emissions. And the second thing we need to really do is to protect forests. The need to reduce emissions, I think, is pretty well understood. We talk about this as decarbonizing the energy sector, the transportation sector, buildings and industry. It also means reducing emissions from the agricultural sector and from the forest sector, and reversing those emissions as we can. The part about protecting forests is a bit less well understood. And when we talk about protecting forests, I think we need to be looking well beyond what is covered by deforestation prevention initiatives, including the carbon markets, that focus on the deforestation frontier, and on, especially in the carbon market space, and on what can yield fungible emission reduction credits for voluntary and compliance markets. Those are all good things, but they don't actually address the fundamental dependence that the global economy has on forests, and particularly on intact forests. What's missing from that is the basic regulatory function that forests provide for climate. Forests act as a carbon sponge, a sponge for taking excess carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. In fact, forests today are taking 1/3 of the carbon dioxide that we put into the atmosphere every year and putting it into storage in wood, in trees. And we would be about 1/2 degree warmer than we are now, at least, without this sponge. Let me just say that again. We would be 1/2 degree warmer. We would be well past 1.5 if we did not have forests. According to the IPCC, 1/2 degree difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees would expose another 1/4 of the world's human population to excessive heat events. There would be tens of millions of additional people subject to water scarcity, and we would have no more coral reefs. So this 1/2 degree, which is actually rather conservative, is quite important. It's conservative because it doesn't even account for the cooling effects that tropical forests have that have nothing to do with carbon dioxide. In addition, the economic analyses show that 1/2 degree difference, and this is in the IPCC 1.5 degree report, would cost the economy, the global economy, minimally tens of trillions of dollars, growing exponentially as if we start counting what moves out to 2050 and towards the end of the century. So we have a very clear requirement, in addition to decarbonization, in addition to reducing emissions from agriculture and forest sectors, to protect forests, to protect this basic regulatory function that the world's forests provide for the global climate.
Thank you, Daniel, for sharing your insights on forests. I very much appreciated when you mentioned the need to protect ecosystems while drastically reducing GHG emissions. The two are indeed highly complementary, and I think actually everyone mentioned it in this panel and in the previous one. This is very inspiring to see that we have to continue to do both at the same time, and that we need one and the other. for example, regarding ocean science and coastal and marine environments. While implementing coastal and marine nature-based solutions, it's absolutely crucial to advance climate and biodiversity goals. They should not substitute for drastic GHG emission cuts and obviously for also rapid phase out of fossil fuels. I think this might actually be my one message for COP. Actually, I'm going to ask this same question for all of you now. What is your number 1 priority for COP26 in terms of outcomes? Maybe Joachim, since we're talking about the ocean, you can also go first.
The top priority for me would be in 3 points, and it would be implement, and implement. We don't have time. We know NbS can work. We know we have problems for scaling up. We know we cannot optimize them, but it is not a tool to optimize anything. It is a tool to provide multiple biodiversity, social, and ecological and climate benefits. And we should, as a scientist, say that yes, we could do even better, but we need to do it now. And I think we don't have time, and we need to implement NbS everywhere we can. And just at the final note, it is important also to understand some enabling conditions, because NbS cannot work in good ways anywhere and anyhow. And something that is important is that they need to be fit to the place they are established, and in particular, they need to be respectful of and meant to provide benefit for local communities, whether they are inhabitants of a very big city, as Théophile mentioned, or a small fisher community along a coast, or some indigenous peoples in any place. So it needs to be a tool to protect biodiversity and provide benefit for people.
Thank you, Joachim. Richard?
Thank you. I think I'd go for get going now, get accounting soon, but be careful when you start selling, would be my message. So I say get going now because sometimes we have the feeling that until you can count something, that it doesn't exist. And actually it's a symptom of the whole climate regime, really, that countries are focused so much on the numbers that they forget that actually if you start restoring an ecosystem now, it will start sequestering. And our ultimate goal here isn't actually to meet targets, it's to stop climate chaos. So getting going with restoring ecosystems right now is a good thing, regardless of whether you can account properly. That said, get accounting soon, because once we start measuring something, we create systems for accountability. And the sooner we can get countries including a full range of ecosystems in their NSAPs and in their national commitments, in a way that people will be able to look into them and say, you had 20,000 hectares of this ecosystem in good condition this year. How many have you got next year? How many have you got next year? And do that measurably and accountably year on year. The sooner we can get doing that, the better. And finally, I say get selling, but do it with great care. Of course, we're going to need large-scale finance to make nature-based solutions work at the level we need. But there's already emerging an alacrity to grab hold of climate cash for nature investment that risks a reductionist approach that puts carbon above all else. We heard from Natalie some of the risks that come if you aim just to meet carbon targets. And we really need the system of standards in place that make sure that you're not double counting, you achieve permanence and genuine additionality, as well as biodiversity benefits on top. We need that in place with real rigor before you start selling carbon from nature-based solutions at scale, because otherwise we'll fall exactly into the trap that you mentioned, which is we'll give people a mitigation holiday by allowing them to pay for stuff that's not real, not additional, and not permanent.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Richard. What about you, Bettina? What do you think?
The rapprochement between international bodies of nature and biodiversity must not be technocratic. For example, between bodies of working groups, for example. NbS must be the mean to regain respect for nature. Is very important. the fight against climate change and biodiversity are not only economic opportunities, celebrate opportunities, but ways to rediscover the sense of the usefulness of nature. It is a way for all peoples to act together, because the solutions are different in the countries according to the species, the climates, but there is no more exploitation of the nature on the poor countries by the rich countries. And responsibilities are still common but different, but there are actions. And for Committee 21, adaptation is our great priority. It is one of the best ways of adaptation and mitigation together.
Thank you, Bettina. Daniel?
Well, thinking about your question, I think it's really important to step back and recognize that COP26 is now is occurring in a context in which we're in an entirely voluntary regime. There are no hard commitments. There are no rules that countries must obey, or there will be broken treaty obligations. We're not in a treaty scenario. We're in a pledge and review scenario under the Paris Agreement, which has actually had some really positive results. If we look at the ambition that there is expressed collectively now, it's a lot better than it was in 2015 at Paris. Collectively, we're now, if countries actually delivered what they say they are, we're down to about somewhere around 2.5 degrees rather than 3.5 or more, where we were 5 years ago. So there is progress there. But what's become really increasingly important at these COPs now is less the formal negotiations, which still have an important role and space, but more the political signaling in the environment that we're in. And we're in a time in which the role of nation states is actually diminished relative to the role of the private sector, and in particular the role of global capital markets. Some of the more important announcements coming out are on the part of hedge fund investors, large investment houses, trillions of dollars in assets committed to net zero. What that actually means is going to be where the rubber really meets the road. Do we really see the political signaling from heads of state saying, yes, we've now given, there's more control of how the world works to private sector and financial flows, and that means that these global capital markets have to act in the best interests of people and planet, and not exclusively focus on the best interest of their quarterly immediate revenues at the expense of long-term or even medium-term costs. The decade ahead is not that far into the long term. So the question really is, will we see in the capital market space a really substantial disinvestment from the drivers of climate change, including both fossil fuel emissions, deforestation, poor agricultural practices, and positive investment in renewable energy, in nature positive, in forest positive agendas. That will be the signal that we can really account for and follow, because that's what's going to determine the future, is where do these trillions of dollars in capital flows go? What do they invest in, and how are revenues being generated going forward? That's the way that our world works now, much more based on those outcomes than on political statements or on the outcomes of a negotiation process.
Well, thank you to all of our fantastic panelists for sharing their perspective that are actually quite complementary. So thank you to all of you. And before I let you go, I just wanted to open the floor to any question. Don't think we have received any from the COP26 platform. Okay, I'm getting a sign that we don't. Perfect, thank you. So if we don't have any question, then I will just thank you for all of your amazing intervention and sharing your knowledge and priorities with us. Thank you so much for taking the time. This side event is therefore coming to an end, and I would like to give the floor to the amazing Sylvie Goyer, who has been there with us for a while now. Thank you, Sylvie. You're the advisor to the Vice President at the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation. Sylvie, thank you so much for being with us. So if you had to summarize this session, what would be your key takeaways? Did we actually succeed in convincing you that marine, terrestrial, and urban nature-based solutions, when they are well-designed and also adaptively managed, have the potential to tackle jointly the climate and the biodiversity crisis?
Thank you, Marine. Thanks to the amazing speakers, indeed. It's been a pleasure to listen to you, and thanks for inviting me. It's always great to be with you. I don't need to be convinced. I'm convinced on nature-based solutions, so it doesn't take much to get me to a meeting like this. Now, I don't have the pretension to be able to wrap up and summarize all of the good points that you brought forward, but I do appreciate the structure that you've proposed, a deep dive and then a round table, highlighting some of the key issues in ocean, terrestrial, or urban setting, and I think that's perfectly fitting. I have picked up a few ideas and a few key messages, and if I may, I'll just share those. Again, this is partially my own. First, I heard loud and clear that nature-based solutions indeed are a complement to measures that must be taken to reduce and eliminate greenhouse gas emissions. I think that's loud and clear. It's not a substitute. I like to call this NDC plus for those NDCs incorporating nature-based solutions. So clearly a focus on, and Daniel explained that very clearly. He underscored it. The focus has to be on reducing emissions, no doubt about it. But nature-based solutions can be a very nice complement. That's my second message. And some of you have articulated this beautifully. Nature-based solutions are indeed no-regret options. You can't lose by bringing about nature-based solutions, not only because of all the core benefits they bring forward, but I like what Bettina mentioned. She introduced the word respect for nature. And indeed, nature-based solutions are a way to reach out to establish this link or re-establish the link between the people and nature. So nature-based solutions, as I see those, there are no regrets options. Go and do that anyway. I'd like to underscore as well the fact that some of you mentioned they're indeed best applied at local level. I mean, nature-based solutions have to be tailored to the people, to the context, and you've mentioned that, you've underscored that. I think that's a good point. My third point comes back from what Theo mentioned earlier, and thanks, Theo, for that beautiful presentation as well. NbS could be best deployed together with other options. So we're talking about hybrid solutions, and indeed we are. We don't have silos. We don't have the traditional options on one hand and the NbS on the other hand. I mean, think of it as a hybrid solutions, bringing those together. I'd love to see dikes with mangroves. I'd love to see structure in the water together with reforestation on the coastal line. So it's, think of it as a complement, yeah? Hybrid solutions. My fourth message is about the challenges in implementing nature-based solutions. Joachim, you emphasized the conditions. Richard, you've talked about accounting that needs to be sorted out. There are indeed a lot of these enabling conditions that need to be put in place. Where, when, how do we implement nature-based solutions? So I mean, to me, that's the fourth message. Nature-based solutions are not without challenges. And that requires indeed some adaptive management, that requires many skills, scientific, but also social. And you've all mentioned the link to public, ensuring public participation, ensuring, reaching out to all of the stakeholders. So those were my four key messages. Now, if I may wrap up and conclude, I know I've taken a bit more time because I have it. So you give it to me, I take it. In conclusion, let me highlight nature-based solutions, to me, are a clear illustration of the nexus approach that's starting to be heard over and over again in COPs. Nature-based solutions help us switch between climate and biodiversity, and you've emphasized that. And what better champion to bridge between those two conventions than nature-based solutions? Yeah? While we know that, and I'd like to end with that, what we're trying to do is to bring the two crises together and then bring the two solutions together, the solutions to climate and the solutions to biodiversity. We know that cooperation mechanisms between the two conventions, unfortunately, still remain weak and at times insufficient. Yet, let me underscore, we have instruments with the NDCs under the Paris Agreement and with the NbS under the CBD convention. We have instruments whereby we can include biodiversity in the NDCs and include climate in the NbS. So let's use those instruments even more. Let's push for an integration and more synergies across these instruments. Let me as well remind you of the amazing workshop that took place in December last year between NbS and IPCC. I think it's the first time that those two scientific bodies got together and came up with the understanding that, gee, we have a lot to share together. Yeah? And they came up with amazing recommendations. It's probably a first step. The scientific communities are talking to each other. Now, of course, it's not enough. Action will be what bring this together. As you rightly pointed out, Richard, you mentioned COP15. Don't lose your sights on COP15. Indeed, don't lose your eyes on COP15. It's not because we're at COP26 that we should lose sight of the other one. So clearly, and I'll repeat your call, I urge all of the participants, COP26 participants, wherever you are on this planet, to indeed, further advocate for the synergies between the two conventions, and further advocate for integration of nature in biodiversity in the climate dialogue. I'll end of that, but reminding you that next year we'll celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Rio Conventions, and that's a good time to think about synergies and to think about getting things faster, more cost effectively as well, faster, quicker, and further. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much, Sylvie, for summarizing today's discussion so eloquently and for your fantastic insights on how to best increase the synergies between the climate and the biodiversity regimes. It is now the end of this side event on nature-based solutions, and I would like to give a warm round of applause to all our distinguished panelists. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would also like to thank the UNFCCC Secretariat for hosting this event, and also their logistic team for their continued support. Thank you very much. Obviously, last but not least, I would like to thank the Zoological Society of London, as well as the Comité 21 for co-organizing this event with the Ocean and Climate Platform. A huge and special thank you to Nathalie, to Sarah, and to Matt over there. Thank you very much.